When you hear the word student visa, you conjure up images of backpackers coming over to New Zealand for a year to pick the kiwis and do something with the grapes. But the student visa for moving to New Zealand has opened up a massive new entry into the country. And this week, you're going to find out how to do that.
Tell me now how I go about, how do I stay in New Zealand forever? How do I go from doing my course to getting my visa and never leaving because I love it so much?
In this week's episode, we're going to talk to Charlotte from NZ Shores Immigration, and she is going to tell you everything there is to know about coming to New Zealand on a student visa. And just to let you know, you can be like in your 40s and still come over on a student visa. So let's jump on in and find out loads more on how to get to New Zealand on a student visa. NZ Ahead, coming to you from Taranaki, New Zealand.
Got it.
Good morning, Charlotte from NZ Shores Immigration Advisors. We're so excited to have you back on the podcast this morning with us.
Thanks for having me, guys. Super excited to be back chatting with you. And I love engaging with your community as well. So really privileged to be here.
Oh, thanks, Charlotte. And we're here to talk. We're going to jump straight in because there's so much to cover. We're here to talk about the student visa pathway, coming over to New Zealand as a student, which I'm so excited to find out about this. As I said to you off air a minute ago, I always thought that coming over as a student was if you're an 18 with a backpack, but that is not the case, is it? So we're going to be jumping in and finding out what this option is and how it opens up your access to get to New Zealand, whether or not you can bring family, are the INZ fussy about what you can study, and just lots more other things like that. And also at the end of the episode, I've got a question from a member of our YouTube community who wants to know about the entrepreneurial visa as well, coming over to New Zealand when you're location independent. So we've got lots to cover. If we just jump straight on in and you tell us what the student visa pathway looks like, that would be great.
Absolutely. So in some cases, it is 18-year-olds with a backpack being sent off to the other side of the world by their parents. So we do get a few of those, but for the most part, it's actually people who are older. Typically, we see people sort of late 30s plus who use it as a tool to get to New Zealand, often easier than what it is to migrate through that skilled migrant pathway. The beauty about the student visa pathway is you can effectively decide, all right, I want to be in New Zealand by this date. You can pick a course, you can pick a semester, and then you can arrive into New Zealand as planned. It takes away a lot of that uncertainty with securing a job offer, because as anyone who's migrated on the basis of a job offer will know, you don't know when that job offer is going to come. It could come at any time, and then suddenly your life's kind of thrown into a sense of craziness while you're busy applying for visas, and it could take 3 months, it could take 12, and you just don't know what that time frame looks like. So a lot of the people we deal with, they will say, right, I want to be in New Zealand in February 2025, so they can work to that timeline. They can move with their families often, which I'll go into a bit more depth, but it does also open up often a really straightforward pathway to residency, which for most people is their end goal.
Right. You're saying that if you are living in the UK or anywhere in the world and you think, I want to move to New Zealand with my family, you can just think, right, okay, well, I'm going to go to a university and I'm going to study. Like recently we had someone on here that was studying to be a chef. I'm going to study to be a chef or anything else. And you can get to New Zealand that way. Is that right?
Yeah. So you do have to be a bit careful about course selection, particularly if you have family. So if you're a single person, it's a lot easier. You don't have to worry about partners and children. If you do have partner and or children, you do have to be mindful about what you do choose to study, because Immigration New Zealand, they do offer what's called an open partnership work visa in some cases and dependent children's student visas in some cases. But it all comes down to course selection. So that's where you have to be a bit particular. So your chef person, they would be fine if they were coming on their own, or if they were happy for their family to just hang out in New Zealand on visitor visas. But if they were wanting someone, their partner to come and live and work as well, and their children to attend school, they would have to look at a qualification at a higher threshold, or a qualification which immigration has deemed as being on the green list. The green list is basically a long-term skill shortage list. list. It's a bunch of qualifications which immigration have determined as leading to a pathway to residency for people in those areas of skill shortage. In some cases, you could come and study a lower level qualification, such as a diploma, or sometimes even a trade qualification, but it is a little bit harder to kind of marry those up often. But if you have a bachelor's degree already, you can come into New Zealand and study a master's. You can get that master's within about 12 months, and your family can come with you and get those full rights. It's not the most straightforward thing to explain, but it's definitely possible depending on what your preference is as a person, I guess.
You said about February, because I mean, a lot of people think, oh, September's the start of the academic year, but obviously February is here. Does it have to be February, March, or can you just jump in at any time?
You can jump in at any semester start date if that's what the courses offer. So quite often February is, our typical, if you're a New Zealand student, you've graduated high school, February would be when you would start university. Most universities or education providers generally offer at least 2, if not 3 start dates. So we've got semester 1, which is February, March, typically semester 2, which is generally about that July, August timeframe. And then some education providers will also offer like a summer school entry date, and that's normally about November. It does depend on the course and it does depend on the education provider. I had a case last week where this particular course that a person wanted to start only had a February start date. So we looked around for different education providers that had different start dates, and that's what we then found a better option to suit when they wanted to travel.
Right, I've got a bunch of questions before we jump in, because now my brain's going, right, first question, is there any age limit to like being a student?
No, so you can come and study at any point in your life. You could be 80 years old and decide you want to turn up and study. So there's no age limit. But obviously, if you are looking for a pathway to residency, then you do need to still generally be under that age of 56 when you apply for resident. You then work backwards from there. So if you were coming to study a 12-month master's, you probably wouldn't want to be any older than sort of 52, 53 when you're starting that course, to then allow enough time for you to then work in New Zealand to then be able to apply for residence.
At 56, that cut-off date. Yeah.
It's really exciting. That is so exciting, because this just opens up another gateway into New Zealand. Can you just give me an example of like what would be a good course to study? If you're saying, oh yeah, there's some of the bit are lower and all that, but what would be, if you really wanted to be accepted and think, right, yeah, that would be my way in, what sort of courses would I be looking at to study?
So it comes down to, it has to be a natural progression normally of what either your work experience or previous qualifications are. So typically Immigration New Zealand wouldn't approve you to go and study a Master of Tourism, for example, if your entire background has been as a scientist. So in that situation, they'd want to say, all right, well, you've worked in this particular role and this would then benefit you, would be a natural progression to what that work experience or previous qualifications are. You do have to be a little bit careful. We have had some success with people coming in and studying completely random things. I recently had a real estate agent who I think he was part of your Slack group.
Oh, really?
He was a real estate agent in the US and then decided he really wanted to be a teacher. So we went through that process and we got him enrolled in that Bachelor of Teaching. But we did have to provide a justification around it as to why has he been doing one thing for the last 10 years and now suddenly he wants to do another. That justification is often easier if it is an area of skill shortage. So teachers are in demand in New Zealand, so we can kind of build a story around that to say, well, actually, he's going to fulfill a really important need once he's qualified. But if it's not an area of skill shortage, it does become harder to make that justification. Part of what we do is we would look at a person's work experience and their qualification history and say, all right, this is what's going to be the most logical option for you. And then we map out that pathway from there.
So just on that point, so you said not been a teacher before. So then you come over as a student, you then train to be a teacher. How long do you have to be a teacher for before you could get residency?
So again, that's a little bit case dependent. So in that particular teacher's example, once he'd done a Bachelor of Teaching, he'd then be able to apply for residence within 12 to 24 months because teachers are on the green list. Primary school teachers are on tier 2, so they can apply for residence after 24 months of working in New Zealand. Secondary school teachers are just being bumped up to tier 1 of the green list from May. So that's another big change that's coming. We could probably do a whole nother podcast on that. Then they'd be able to apply for residency straight away if they wanted to, or they could wait if they wanted to. So again, it kind of depends on what your qualification is, and then what your pathway to residency is. So the skilled migrant category, just to throw in another curveball, if you come and study a bachelor's degree in New Zealand that's not on that green list, you could apply for residence after 3 years of working here. If you come and study a master's degree, you can apply for residence 12 months after working here. And then anything that's kind of like a postgrad diploma that sits at about that level 8 level in New Zealand, you could apply for residence after 2 years of working in New Zealand. So again, it chops and changes depending on what the qualification is and what the occupation is.
This is why we always say use an immigration advisor, because that is just my mind's blown now. Yeah, exactly. Because there's so many complex, different ways, little routes that you can take. And knowing someone like you guys is just brilliant to be able to guide you. And on that subject, so I know this is a bit nosy and you don't have to reveal anything, but I mean, I don't know who you're talking about on our Slack group because everything is confidential with you. But did you help them build that story? Is that part of your service that you help them to get through and convince they can be a teacher? Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So New Zealand Shores is actually what we call an education agent. So we have been approved by both Education New Zealand, and then we're also approved by all education providers at a tertiary level in New Zealand to enrol people in their courses. What that means is we get special training through each of those education providers. Typically once a year they'll run training webinars, so we know how to identify courses. So again, we look at the person, we look at, for example, if we take that person that wanted to be a teacher, we look at them, we look at the location they want to be in. Some people say, I don't care where I go. Some people say, I want to be in Auckland or Wellington. So then we drill down another level. We look at the education providers in that area and we say, all right, these are your options. At each education provider, these are your course options. And then we go through the process of enrolling them. So because we get that extra training, we know exactly what that particular education provider is looking for, which means that when we do submit those enrollments, typically, should sail through pretty quickly because we've provided everything from the outset. Once someone's got their offer of place, we then put our immigration advisor hats back on, and then we go through the process of these are the documents you're going to need. If there are extra justifications needed around why you're studying a particular course, we will help write those letters. We obviously review them, say, great, or no, you need to add a bit more detail. And then we submit the applications to Immigration New Zealand with all of that information required and then manage it through till completion. Student visas can be a bit of a tricky one. Immigration are very harsh on them. If you don't dot your I's and cross your T's exactly as they want to, they will actually decline them outright. They're not giving anyone a chance to respond at the moment. It is really important that you line up all of those, factors perfectly to make sure that your application will be approved. That's where using someone like us comes as a highly recommended option.
Yes.
The thing about being education agents too is that if we enroll someone, the university or the tertiary provider will actually pay our fee. And we can actually offer our services for free to people because we're getting paid by those education providers for the introduction. So for your community, there's really no downside to using us really to assist with that process because there's no charge to them.
Yeah.
That's fantastic, isn't it? And so they just contact you regarding that and you'll be able to say, hey, if you're going to this particular uni, you could be free. Wow.
Yeah. Absolutely. So we typically only recommend courses or providers where we are registered education agents. Sometimes people do come to us and say, look, we really want to go to this place. And if we aren't already education agents and it's perhaps a first time enrollment for us, that might be grounds enough for them to actually sign us up as education agents. And if it's not, then we can still do the visa and we can guide them through the enrollment. It just means that that provider's not paying our fee. So then the client has to then pay our service fee for that one. I think there's probably only 2 or 3 that we're not yet education agents for out of all of the polytechnics and private tertiary providers and the universities. So 9 times out of 10, our service would 100% be free.
As an international student, are there different prices between, say, 2 of the most popular courses? What's the difference in price for overseas students at the moment?
Pricing does, particularly with universities, pricing does vary between universities. For example, Auckland University, often a really attractive option for international students, and they do know that, so their pricing often sits a little bit higher. But generally, the fees are quite close. When you are coming to study as an international student, the money side of it is definitely the biggest factor. You are, for a master's degree, looking at anywhere between 30,000 right through to 70,000 New Zealand dollars, depending on the course you want to study. Then obviously it can get cheaper as you look at, lower level diplomas and things will often have cheaper fees attached to them. In New Zealand, we have what's called Te Pukenga. So that is, it's basically an umbrella organisation run by the government, which has pulled in all of the polytechnics and private tertiary organisations under it. We used to find cheaper courses a lot easier, but because that big umbrella now exists, the pricing's quite similar. But our new government's talking about pulling that apart again and handing back individual governance to each of those organisations. So it'll be an interesting 12 months to see what happens on the fees side.
That's a lot cheaper than the UK though, or the US by the sound of things.
Yeah, and that's another thing we find. A lot of our students who do come from the US, they know it's a lot cheaper to come here and study than what it is to study there, and they are mapping out that pathway to residency at the same time. So it's a win-win for them.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
So going back to the money side, did they pay for this? So that 30,000, so it's going to cost 30,000. They pay for that, don't they?
Yeah. So if you want to come and study in New Zealand, that cost is on you, unless you can get a scholarship through whoever you decide to study with. You do also have to, on top of your course fees, Immigration New Zealand do want you to prove that you've got, if it's just you coming, you have to provide evidence you've got an additional 20,000 New Zealand dollars in terms of support funds. And if you've got a family coming with you, you have to show another 4,000. So it could be an additional 24,000 on top of the fees. So if it is a $30,000 master's course, you then have to provide either evidence that you've got 50,000 or 54,000 New Zealand dollars. And immigration are really finicky about where that money comes from. A big portion of proving the documentation with student visas is showing that trail of funds. So that's, we spend a lot of time looking at people's bank statements to show where did this money come from? How long's it been there? Is immigration going to question? And occasionally we have to, say to people, look, sorry, we have to wait 3 months or 6 months to show that you've got those funds in your account, because after that 3 to 6 month period, immigration stops asking questions about where the money came from.
So you haven't just borrowed it for 5 minutes sort of thing. And
Yeah.
So is that $4,000 for the family? Is that $4,000 a year? That's not much, is it?
Yeah.
4 kids?
Is that per person, or is that just like for the whole family?
Oh, it's the whole family. So if you had a family of 6, it would just be that $4,000.
Imagine feeding our two on $4,000 a year.
A day.
I wish,
Exactly.
I was just going to say, if your partner is able to get that open work visa, then obviously the partner can work full time. And then on student visas, you are allowed to work part-time during semester and then full-time during holidays. So you still have the ability to earn an income while you are studying as well.
That's good.
And what's part-time? Is that 20 hours or something, or 40 hours?
20 hours per week, the maximum during semester. And then, during semester breaks, you're able to work full-time as many hours as you like.
That's good. And that's on anything you want to do? Like just buy
absolutely.
Like that? Yeah.
Yep, you could work in a supermarket, or you could go and get a job that's relevant to what you're studying. You've got full flexibility. I've had a few students who've spent their time driving for Uber, whatever you want to do.
Yeah, that's great that you can do that, isn't it? And you can work and get some extra money coming in.
Yeah.
So what are the top things to study? What would you say are the top things to come over to New Zealand and study?
That's probably a bit of a tough one. We see people studying everything. If you really are wanting a fast-tracked pathway to residency, ideally you would come and study a master's degree of any description. But then again, anything that's deemed a skill shortage in New Zealand, you're going to have an easier time of getting that student visa issued. So if people want to know what those areas of skill shortage are, rather than me trying to rattle off, I think there's about 200 occupations on there now. Rather than me trying to remember all of those, you can Google Immigration New Zealand Green List, and it will actually give you a whole list online that you can look and drill down into that as well.
Okay. So let's just start a little story. So just give me one of the things on the list that's low, like that we can't get people over here to do. Just name one of the things.
Top of my head, something like a diploma in construction management. So that would be a really good option that gets you onto that tier 1 of the green list, which means that as as soon as you'd finished your course, got a job offer, you could apply for residency straight away.
Right. Okay. So say I'm over in the UK then, and I'm working as a plumber, and, you know, I've done a bit of like helping my friend out, manage the guys and everything like that. But I can't get a job in New Zealand. I've got 50 grand in the bank, or let's just say 60, because that'll just cover me. And I can't get a job. But now I found out that I can go to Auckland University and study to be a construction manager. You're going to look at my background and go, well, Liz, I know you've been a plumber for the last 25 years, but you have done a bit of management. So I reckon we could get you into this course.
Yep.
I can then come to New Zealand. I can pay my fees. I can bring my family. I've proved that I've got the money. I'm not 56. I'm only 28 actually. And
how many years been
I just had a hard life. And I come to New Zealand. I bring my family. Tell me now how I go about. How do I stay in New Zealand forever? How do I go from doing my course to getting my visa and never leaving because I love it so much?
Yep. So if you were coming, for example, to study that diploma in construction management, so you do your course, which would be about 12 months. You then get what's called a post-study work visa. So post-study work visas are available to anyone who comes and studies in New Zealand. If you're studying below degree level, so diploma level 6 is below degree level, you will get a post-study work visa, which is the equivalent duration of your study. If you're studying a bachelor's degree, you will get, again, you know, it could be a 3-year bachelor's degree, you'll get a post-study work visa for anywhere between 1 to 3 years, depending on the qualification. If you're studying a master's or a PhD, then you get a 3-year post-study work visa, regardless of the type of qualification. So that post-study work visa, it's an open work visa. It allows you basically to then go and find a job offer, which will lead you down that pathway to residency. So our plumber who's come to New Zealand with his family, he could do his 12-month course. He'd get his post-study work visa, and then as soon as he'd got a job offer, which was relevant to that qualification, or even just if it fell into the green list, you know, gets a job offer as a project manager or a building foreman or whatever it might be, those occupations are on that tier 1 of the green list, so he could apply for residency outright. So you could, in an ideal world, be looking at, you know, 18 months before you had residency.
Right.
So that open work visa, though, so say he couldn't get a job in, you know, related to that, could he still work in a bar or something until he got a job related to that or not? Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's open. You can do as you please. I guess.
But you're trying
yeah, we get people that do that. They'll just pick up whatever in the meantime, and then they use, you know, the duration of that visa to find the best job. So open work visa means you can work in any role you want to for any employer for as little or as many hours per week. So you've got full flexibility.
Okay. And what about my kids and family? So, you know, my partner and family, can they work? Can they go to school? Yeah, how does that work?
Yeah, so in that particular scenario with the plumber, because his qualification was relevant to the green list and it's deemed an approved qualification, in that right, his partner would get an open work visa as well. So, you know, they can do what they want. Again, work, not work, be self-employed, work for as little or as many hours per week. And then the children are able to attend school as domestic students. So public school in New Zealand, and pay generally about $100 to $200 per child per year. So it's a school donation. So education is virtually free in that scenario for your children.
That's fantastic. Have we not asked anything that you would like to say further on this topic before we leave it? Have we covered everything, or is there anything you need to say?
I think the only other thing I would say that becomes an option, this is another thing we've seen a number of people doing. Sometimes the person that comes and studies isn't necessarily always the person who will be the best candidate for residency. So I had a case recently where the wife had a bachelor's degree, so we opted for her to come and study a master's. The husband was highly skilled in the ICT space and would fall under tier 1 of the green list. So what we did, they decided, they were a classic example. We want to live in, I think they came to Hamilton actually. They wanted to live in Hamilton. They wanted to be in New Zealand by this date. So we picked out the course. She came and studied, and he actually then went and got a job offer in his relevant field. And we then applied for straight to residence while she was still studying. So the whole family got residence before she'd even finished her course. So again, we can kind of pick and choose as to what's going to be the best pathway for that entire family. Immigration New Zealand won't bat their eyelids if the partner applies for residence, but if you're the student and you come to New Zealand and you say, I'm coming to study, and then partway through that course you suddenly drop out, get a job and apply for residency, they will ask questions. So that's just something to be mindful of. Yes, it's a really awesome pathway to get you to residence, but if immigration do define that, when you're applying for residence that you weren't genuine in your intention with that student visa, they will actually then raise big questions with the processing of the residency. So we do get the odd inquiry where someone's turned up, started their course, said, oh no, I've got a job and now I want to apply for residence. Well, actually, you probably should finish your course, because otherwise they could decline your residence for not entering New Zealand in genuine intent.
Bit dodgy, that, isn't it?
It can be.
Yeah.
I mean, it kind of depends. Like if you were a nurse and you came to study a Master of Nursing and then perhaps got a job and applied for residence, they might not scrutinise you as much because, hey, we really need nurses. But if you were our plumber, for example, they probably would take a bit of a harsher stance on you.
I've got a friend who's over here from India at the moment, he works in a bar, and he did what they call PIMS, which I think is is like a management type for hospitality and stuff. So what's his chances of getting residency over here? Would that be quite high, or would that be pretty tricky?
It would depend on the course he studied. So if he came in and studied like a Bachelor of Tourism, for example, which I think PIMS do offer, he would then just need to get what's deemed a skilled role. So it could be manager of a restaurant, or it could be a management level role in like a hotel or something. And then after working in New Zealand for 3 years, he'd be able to apply. So yeah, that's definitely options for him.
I'll give him that advice. Maybe get hold of you or something as well.
Yeah, I can let him know. Take a quick look and say, hey, this is what you need to do.
All right, that'd be great.
Before we move on to our entrepreneur question that we had from someone from Swipe Room on YouTube, I just wanted to say, because again, this is playing on my mind, because you said earlier, oh, INZ, they're really, really strict with the student visas. Like, they won't mess about. Why is that? Why do they feel like that about the student visas?
Honestly, we don't know. It seems to be at massive odds with what government's trying to achieve at the moment. So pre-COVID, international students and international education was actually, I think it was our third biggest export industry, and someone will probably correct me on that, but it was definitely up there. It used to bring in a lot of money for New Zealand, and we're not sure what's happened in the last few years for immigration to take such a harsh stance on it. It's a bit odd because in the media, and we hear about these universities who haven't had a lot of international students back, and they really need the money to start coming back in so they can keep offering courses and hiring more staff. And we've got the government saying we want more international students, and then we've got a disconnect where immigration, if there's one little thing missing with that application, they'll just decline it. So they're not even like a work visa, for example. If there's a document missing, they'll say, hey, look, can you just provide this? But we don't know why they're taking such a harsh stance. We have 3 student visa specialists in-house with New Zealand Shores, and they haven't had a decline yet. And I think some of our clients get really frustrated because sometimes there's a lot of back and forth of, this is exactly what your bank statements need to show, and this is the duration of evidence we need to provide. And I think people get a bit frustrated because it probably feels like we're being a bit overzealous, but it's just so important. If they decline the visas, well, you're not getting that money back. We're really, really careful about getting that right from the outset.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Just to be clear before we move on, people who want to use your services to come over on the student visa pathway, they don't have to pay any fees. Is that right? They don't pay fees to NZ Shores. Yeah,
the only condition to that is that we actually manage the enrolment. So if you go and enroll yourself, the education provider will determine that we haven't made the introduction. So in that case, they don't then pay our fee. Whereas if we manage the whole process right through from course identification to actually submitting your enrolment through our agent portal, then they will pay our fee, and then we don't have to charge you. So that,
so what you're saying is don't go to the uni first, go to you first.
Yep. Yes. Come to us.
Because once your name's on that list, you're not going to get that money back, and you're going to
correct.
All right.
Happy for people to email me directly. I know you guys will pop my email address somewhere. It's Charlotte@NZ Shores, so you guys can drop that wherever you want to. But people are welcome to email me, and then I can connect you to one of our student visa specialists.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Is it nzshores.co.nz?
Oh, yes, sorry. Charlotte@nzshores.com.
.com.
.com,
Right,
yeah.
okay.
Yep.
And also, if you're watching this and you're part of our community, our Slack community, our private NZ Ahead community, Charlotte is in our community. So you can DM her or go on the Visa channel and just reach out to Charlotte there. So yeah, that's absolutely brilliant. So Charlotte, before we let you go, we had a question, like I say, thank you, Swipe Room on YouTube. How is it if you're self-employed? For example, if you're self-sufficient entrepreneur and you can work anywhere in the world, what are the possibilities of getting into New Zealand and starting to pay your taxes there instead? Is that what they were saying?
No, I think what it is they're saying is you're location independent and you're paid in the US dollar because it's through YouTube or whatever it is, just say.
Yeah.
What's the situation on someone wanting to get residency here or just coming to live here?
So the residence pathway is a little bit tricky. So we do have what's called the entrepreneur visa. Again, this is another one that's very notorious with Immigration New Zealand for a high decline rate. New Zealand Shores does have a 100% success rate in this visa. It's quite hard to meet the category. It's quite hard to meet the category. And it does actually require someone to come and start up a business in New Zealand. So if you are, YouTubers, for example, where you're getting the majority of your income from, you're probably not wanting to come and set up a business in New Zealand. So we'd probably flag that option. There's talk of like a global, I think they were calling it like a global impact visa. So it's been proposed with our last election that happened in October last year, where basically people who were nomad workers would be able to come in on that visa and live and work for a period of time. We haven't seen anything come out from new government about that visa pathway. Immigration doesn't seem to be top of their priority list. It would be for people in that exact situation. So attracting digital nomads to come and live and work and continue doing whatever they are doing. So hopefully we see that arrive sometime in the next 6 months, fingers crossed, because that would be a really cool addition. The third option you could consider is it's an investment-based visa. So depending on how much money you have, it's called the Active Investor Plus, but it does require 5 to 15 million New Zealand dollars. So at the moment that would kind of be
15 million.
Yeah, threshold used to be a lot lower. So generally people would be able to come if they had about 3 million New Zealand dollars to invest. But our last government hiked it up quite significantly. Again, new governments talked about going back and revisiting that because the number of investors has just completely dropped off a cliff because that threshold's so much higher. So fingers crossed that we do start to see a bit of change and we start, attracting people who have asked this question because, they do actually make a really valuable contribution to New Zealand and our landscape.
And you just put me right on this one. Is you invest that, so say it's $6 million, just say it is. You still have control of that money, what you invest it in, or do you have to put it into a bond that like a government bond or something?
Yeah, again, immigration made it a lot harder. So it used to be just had to be deemed an acceptable investment and there weren't really there was some criteria around it. So government bonds and things were quite easy. And that's typically what we saw a lot of people invest in. Now, Immigration New Zealand have a list which is managed through New Zealand Trade and Enterprise of what they deem an acceptable investment. So you don't really have a whole lot of control. I mean, you can choose from within that list, but you don't actually have a whole lot of control outside of that as to what you want to invest in. So that's what they're potentially looking at kind of changing up to make it more attractive because most people who have that level of money to invest, they typically want a little bit more freedom about what they can and can't do.
And I suppose you've got to show exactly where that money's come from and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, it has to come through legitimate business sources and we have to be able to track it through the banking system. You often have to provide evidence of, has that money come through savings from salaries or have you had other investments or successful businesses or inheritance or whatever it might be. So a bit like the student visa, there's a lot of admin work that goes into tracing those funds to try and show where they've come from legitimately.
Do you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of, I just imagine Immigration New Zealand like Wizard of Oz, behind that big purple curtain. It's like you go to the wizard and go, can I come in, wizard? And
It's going to fall off sometimes.
It feels like that some days.
I bet. Because I don't expect you probably know one person in there. It's just like this entity of like who knows what's behind the curtain kind of thing.
As advisors, we tend to, we do have a bit of an idea of who we can contact in certain situations, but Immigration New Zealand are moving to become more faceless. So we used to be able to readily get, managers' contact details if we had concerns or worries or needed something answering. We used to have relationship managers who we could lean on quite heavily if we needed, information that was a little bit harder to obtain. And now everything's becoming, like Manukau INZ at mb.co.nz, so they're making it a lot harder to actually contact a human that you know who you're talking to. So it is pretty much turning into that whole purple curtain situation where you don't know who you're talking to or who's responding to your email. It's, landscape's changing, that's for sure.
And we've noted, and we'll let you go, I know, because Brian's looking at his watch now, so I know we're going over time, but I know, I just reading all like the comments on people chatting together on our Slack community, like loads of people use you. And so we never ever feel like we have to, not that we would sell you, but we never feel like we have to do that because they're doing it for us, because lots of people use you already. They're really pleased with you. And to be honest, every time I chat to you, and I don't want to, again, bore you with, when we moved to New Zealand 14 years ago, but it has changed enormously. It really has. It's just like there's so many different things to consider and paperwork and options and what, like you
point
say,
systems and all that's all changed, doesn't it? Yeah.
You think you're the one that gets the visa and then someone else ends up getting it in your family because they're more qualified. You just want to know that stuff.
No, and look, I've been a licensed advisor for almost 9 years now, and what policy was and what visas were when I first started this job, it's probably changed 4 or 5 times in that 9-year period. So it's constantly evolving. So especially since COVID, I feel like I've had to relearn my entire job.
Yeah. That's good though, isn't it? It's brilliant to keep it fresh and just like keep on top of your game and things like that.
So. Keeps life interesting.
They don't make it easy, do they, Charlotte?
No, they don't make it easy.
Like a rat's nest of things that they make, like, it's like, it's not just I'd just like to apply for this, please.
No.
Well, you can, but
that's it.
There's 100 things to consider.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, Charlotte, thank you so much for joining us. What I love about you is you're always just there, and I see you on the chat, and I can see you just giving your advice endlessly for free, because that's what you're doing. It's just you're always open, willing to share all your information, and we love you for that. So thank you so much, you and you guys at
Fabian as well.
Fabian, I know we don't see much of Fabian, but he's always there in the background, and so a lot of emails and things with him. But thank you so much. And people who want to reach out to you, just say your email again. We will put it in the description below, but just say your email.
So charlotte@nzshores.com. So please reach out. I'm more than happy to, if someone's got any questions about migration, they're not sure what their pathway is, even if, regardless of whether it's student visas or coming as a skilled migrant or an investor, I'm more than happy to answer any questions that people have had. So just drop in that you've been watching these podcasts or YouTube channels, or you're in the Slack group, and I'll make sure I know exactly who you are and happy to help.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Charlotte.
That's all right.
Day, and thanks again for joining us.
You too. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thanks
very much.
Bye.
Imagine this. You want to move to New Zealand with your family, but there's just one problem. You've got a bit of a shady past. Can you still move here? Can you still come over to New Zealand?
Half our clients have some ridiculous charge on their police certificate from when they were 18. So whether it's you have accidentally shoplifted something or thrown a punch in a pub fight when you were young and drunk.
In this week's episode, you're going to meet Charlotte. Charlotte is a licensed immigration advisor, and she's going to share with you the pros and cons of whether or not to use a company like hers to move to New Zealand.